we agreed to get to play this duplicitous role. And part of healing that is being, I think, honoring and sacred to our journey as humans. We're not screwing everything up per se. We're having the experience of separateness and suffering that we said we would. And we're trying to heal it. It's not that we need to stay in the space of shadow perpetually, but to own that that too is sacred, that that too comes from God and source. It's part of the healing. It's like, we're not broken. Like this is exactly what we're supposed to do.
Welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast, where we talk about everything from spirituality, self-development, relationships, mindfulness, wellness, and everything that will help you embrace all that you are so you can expand into the best version of yourself. And welcome back to another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. The guest on today's episode is someone I've followed on Instagram ever since her page first came out, as it's a treasure trove of plant medicine information. She is an 18-year veteran of plant medicines, a traditionally trained Ayahuasquera and Huachumera. She is a pioneer in the psychedelic integration space. She is an author, certified death doula, CEO, spokesperson for plant medicines, and she's mostly made of fire. Co-founding Plant Medicine People, a tribe committed to safe, ethical, and profoundly healing relationships with all of nature's miraculous entheogens. She is humbly working with reverence to the indigenous tribes that protected and passed on these traditions, and is committed to protecting their rights and interests as well as those of the plants themselves. So it's a great pleasure to introduce you to Kat Courtney. Kat, welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast.
Adam, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. And that was quite the introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
Oh, I have no doubts that you will be able to do so. For those of our listeners that aren't familiar with you, aren't familiar with Plant Medicine People, why don't you go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourself and really kind of what drew you to this path?
Yeah, 20 years ago or so, Adam, I heard this word ayahuasca and everything in me lit up of what is that? And mind you, this is before she was the coolest thing out there. Everybody and their grandmother is working with ayahuasca now, it seems. Back then, it was a very best kept secret. And I really needed healing. At that point in my life, I was doing really well in the corporate world, and on paper, my life was incredible. But inside, I was lost and I didn't love myself. And I just felt like a fraud, like really deep in imposter syndrome. I was diagnosed bipolar, bulimia, all these things that were so painful. And I thought, well, I'll just go to the jungle and see what happens. I didn't actually expect much, to be honest. But finding ayahuasca was like a missing puzzle piece, and it illuminated the possibility that I could heal. It's not like, a single cycle fixed me. No, but for the first time in my life, after working with ayahuasca, I felt like I could heal, that it was possible to be happy. And it sent me not only on a journey of my own healing, but a couple of years in, I finally got the courage to go, can a white girl from Montana sit behind the altar? Is that possible? And that led me to finding a teacher and a whole amazing journey of apprenticing with both ayahuasca and Huachuma, and learning to be of service to others, which is always about being in service to myself, first and foremost. So it's been a wild ride from corporate girl to plant medicine girl. And now, as you mentioned last year, launched Plant Medicine People, which is the combination of my two personas, basically, to get to bring a business to the world that is first and foremost about relationships to plants. They're the stars in my mind and heart, and we people are secondary because we need them. They don't need us.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. And it's almost like they also remind us that we are stars too. We're just stars encapsulated in a human body.
Yeah, and we have these little complicated egos that makes everything a bit challenging, but we're beautiful for that. That's why they support us as we're doing that hard work of having an experience of separateness and suffering in that way. But yeah, we're made of the same cosmic stardust that everything else is.
Exactly. So you and I share a very similar story. Granted, I didn't really go into the corporate world, but I've talked about this a lot on the podcast I spent 20 years in the high-end home theater industry. And so really just feeding materialism, and that if you just get the next biggest TV or the next loudest sound system or the next greatest gadget, you're going to be happy. And it was like this endless cycle that I kept seeing, only to realize that the more I fed into it, the less and less happy I actually was. Even though, just like you, on paper, life looked great. From the outside looking in, it looked like I had everything: the house, the nice cars, my wife and I could go on vacations, and yet no amount of stuff made me feel fulfilled. And we chatted a little bit right before we started this at how my introduction with plant medicines first was with cannabis when I was 15 years old. And when I was 12, I was diagnosed ADHD and bipolar. So again, similar ties with you of the outside world saying, hey, we don't know what to do with this highly sensitive, very energetic being, so let's go ahead and put them on medication so that they are normal. And then being introduced to cannabis, it was like, oh, I actually feel more myself than I've ever felt through any of the medications that I've taken. And granted, I took those medications all the way up until 20 years old, and then ran out on a vacation in Mexico and realized that, oh, maybe these aren't the answer. And that's when I really started searching. And then 2018, traveled down to Peru, again, sat with ayahuasca, and was shown kind of that same thing, that there are so many different ways to come back to ourselves. There's so many different ways to be able to heal those old wounds. And in my first ceremony, what she told me that was going to be the fastest way I was going to be able to come back to myself was through forgiveness.
For me, it was integrity.
Mm.
That's the first thing she showed me. It's great life you have. Too bad you hate it and you're pretending to love it. The lies I was telling myself. So isn't that amazing? The simple foundation of forgiveness or integrity. And that is the Pandora's box in a beautiful way that begins the path of healing. Because these, when we work with plant medicines, these concepts of forgiveness, integrity, et cetera, are not new, right? It's just, you feel it in such a deep way of like, that's it. That's what I need to experience in order to take the next step in my healing.
Yeah.
And yeah, those are fundamental. But if they stay mental, then they're not embodied. We're not living in them.
Yeah. So I mentioned one word that you and I are also very familiar with, the word entheogens. But for our listeners that are like, what does that even mean? What is this word? I've maybe heard it mentioned a few times, but I don't truly understand. Will you take us into a deep dive in what that means?
It's my favorite word in description of plant medicines. So natural organic medicines that, theo, the etymology is connection to God, theology, like connection to spirit. So it's just a description of a medicine that has a psychotropic effect that helps us feel like we're connected to source again, however we define that. And I absolutely adore shamanism in that there's no dogma. You don't have to believe any set thing. Whatever your definition of God or source or however it looks and feels is valid, which that alone was very transforming to me when I left Catholicism and found my way to this path of like, I get to cut out the middleman or the middle woman, and I get to have my experiential source. And that's what an entheogen does. It allows us to experience our personal relationship to God or spirit.
Yeah, that's a beautiful explanation of that. And I think a lot of people that will start to read on ayahuasca, huachumera, DMT, psilocybin, any of these substances that have the God molecule, if you will, and have the ability to introduce you to God. I have always felt that because they do such a great job of taking us inward, they're just showing us the God that exists within ourselves.
It's exactly how I feel too, as within, so without. Our spiritual texts all express this in different ways. And that's actually, I think, a big piece of healing. We were mentioning the complexity of us humans having egos. We're not broken as a result of that. Just because our world is full of shadow and we're doing some things to each other, to the planet, it turns out we're supposed to. We agreed to get to play this duplicitous role. And part of healing that is being I think, honoring and sacred to our journey as humans. We're not screwing everything up per se. We're having the experience of separateness and suffering that we said we would. And we're trying to heal it. It's not that we need to stay in the space of shadow perpetually, but to own that that too is sacred, that that too comes from God and source. It's part of the healing. It's like, we're not broken, like this is exactly what we're supposed to do.
Yeah. And I think that's something that many people get confused on when they talk about being on a healing journey or going and doing these retreats and things to heal yourself. And many people would look at that as like you're admitting to the fact that there's something wrong with you, when I call it the journey back to self. It's remembering that we are just trying to actually uncover and heal and reprogram all of the things that have been placed on us throughout our lifetime, and coming back to who we fundamentally were the day that we were born, when we are the most pure essence of who we are as an individual. And I've found that plant medicines have a very, very unique way of instilling that within ourselves. I also am a breathwork practitioner, so I have the same belief that, you can get there just with the breath. It might take you a few more sessions. And in a way, would you say that plant medicines are almost like a cheat code, if you will, of kind of being able to take a quantum leap, much more so than if you just sat in meditation every day and did breath work and yoga, and those practices can still get you there. But being able to take a ride or take a trip almost has the ability to unlock a door that would have taken so much more time and so much more work to get to.
Absolutely. All paths up the mountain lead to the same place, right? We're all coming to a place of enlightenment, unity, whatever words you want to describe it, healing. Plant medicines are essentially the turbo route. It's the fast track. That doesn't mean, the cheat code. The caveat to that is that they're intense, they're difficult, they're wildly challenging. So you can take the scenic route, which is more meditation and like the slow, methodical way, just as beautiful, just as effective. Or you can sit with ayahuasca thousands of times the way I have and like, boom, you know, it's not for the faint of heart, though. The balance of the fast track is that it is so intensely challenging sometimes. In my complete integrity, I can say that the hardest nights of my life have been with ayahuasca, and I wouldn't change a thing about it. But in the middle of those, I'm like, never again. I am not drinking this again. This is so hard. That part of that human part is just can't help but question, why the heck did you drink this jungle medicine again? Because this is difficult. But the rewards of it, the depth of healing, expansion, insight, so worth it once it's integrated. But it's so common when you're in it, you're like, yeah, I'm taking the slow route from now on. This sucks.
I've used the metaphor before of like taking a plant medicine journey is similar to getting a tattoo. It hurts like hell when you're going through the process and you question yourself the entire time. Why did I choose to do this? But then some time goes by and you thoroughly enjoy the new artwork that's on your body and you're like, maybe it's time to get another one. It keeps you coming back, even though there is that part of your mind that remembers, yeah, but you remember how much it hurt the last time. Yeah, but maybe it won't hurt that much this time. There's always that looking on that brighter side, even though you have to go through the depths and through the darkness in order to get to the light.
I love that analogy. The one I typically use is it's like jumping out of a perfectly good airplane, where you jump out and there's that moment of, what have I done? And it's intense and exhilarating. But as soon as you're landing safe on the ground, you're like, yeah, that was amazing. I want to go again. So yeah, the perfect metaphors.
As always, with all of my guests, I have a signature question that I like to ask that I have found everyone comes with a slightly different answer based upon their life experience. So, Kat, what did you have to embrace in your life in order to expand into the person you are today?
Such a great question. The short answer, or the more general answer, is darkness. Like I had to embrace my relationship with darkness, but specifically, I would say the flavor of darkness that has been most challenging is fear, my relationship with fear. And, in the beginning of my journey with plant medicine, part of my mission was to get rid of fear. I'm tired of being scared. I don't want this anymore. And Adam, it took me years to finally realize maybe fear isn't the problem. Maybe my relationship to fear is. Maybe, and because I remember, reading or hearing somewhere that the response physiologically in the body to fear and excitement is the same response, biochemically speaking. It's how we relate to it that determines, is it resistance or is it yay, excitement? And I remember ayahuasca showing me, like, do you want to give up this passion, this excitement, this incredible fire energy that you have? Or, do you want to just be apathetic and not feel fear, but not feel excitement? Well, that's easy, right? If like putting it that way, I'm like, okay, this is a blessing to have this energy. But it's that relationship with fear throughout my whole journey. It's been my greatest teacher, and realizing it's an ally, not an enemy to try to get rid of.
In a way similar to the ego.
Exactly.
I do feel in the psychonaut community, there's a lot of this killing the ego, and it's all about having an ego death. And I always loved Alan Watts, one of his lectures, talking about at how you can try to kill the ego as much as you want. It's impossible. You will never make it happen. You just have to treat it like a friend and learn to build a relationship off of that. And the Reiki teacher that I learned my teacher training from, William Rand, he talks about it how many people actually just operate from a wounded ego. And really the healing journey is about healing the ego, because the ego's main job is to actually help us to achieve higher states of consciousness. It's not that it's just a protector mechanism. It's just meant to keep you small. When it is wounded, yes, that's what it's going to tell you. But it's through facing that fear of what would it look like on the other side of that if I was to actually be excited about jumping out of a plane, instead of looking at it as being this terrifying circumstance. My wife bought me a skydive for my 30th birthday. And when you explained that, it perfectly puts it into perspective, because the moment my legs started hanging out that door, I was like, what am I doing? This is not a good decision. But because I had a guy strapped to my back that pushed me out the door, I didn't have much of a choice. And in an instant, it went from absolute terror to pure exhilaration. And it's very similar. I was literally just going to say that. It's very similar to the ceremony of, there was an interview that Mike Tyson did. I want to say it was on the Joe Rogan podcast. And he was talking about his experience with 5-MeO-DMT, from the toad. And how he first took it, he was like, no, yeah! Because you finally get past that nothing but fear. And then when you surrender to that fear and you surrender to that experience, it opens it up into just this blissful state. And that's not to say, listeners, that it's always a blissful state. I'm pretty sure Kat can attest to the fact that it is not always a blissful state, and sometimes it really takes the work.
And at the same time, one of my favorite expressions that ayahuasca has given me is, if we can walk through hell with a smile on our faces, then everything is bliss. It's learning, it's that relationship with darkness again. It's learning that the way that we are working with the energy matters more than the energy itself. So when I'm not in blissful states in life or psychedelic journeys, I know that that's my teacher. Like, okay, what in me is resisting? Where is the wounding, the contraction of fear? And how can I nurture and help myself to get to a place where I'm simply saying yes to the experience? I think that's what she has taught me, is when I go into contraction of no, not this. My job is to soften, to be connected to my body, and to find a yes. Like, yes. Okay, I drank the medicine, or I said yes to this experience, because that's where that spaciousness can come in, where we can find our way to bliss. So, and it's so empowering, isn't it, to know that we have the capacity to relate to anything that's happening in a space of gratitude and even bliss. It's not circumstantial, not that I have mastered that, mind you, but I know it's possible. And that's kind of my mission as a human, is to find these situations where my ego reacts in a space of wound, and find my way to healing, so that that experience can be blissful if I get to have it again.
Yeah.
Sounds so simple when we say it. It's not so easy.
Right, right. Yeah, it's always that easier said than done.
Yes.
So again, we've mentioned, and I think at this point in time in the podcast, if the listeners have been listening from the beginning of season 1, they're pretty familiar with me bringing up ayahuasca and talking about that. But I have mentioned Huachuma several times, and I've never really kind of quite dove into what that is. So will you take us on that journey and give us the perspective of why working with one over the other and how they can work together as a sacred union?
It's that last piece that intrigues me the most. So, the way that I can describe the relationship between these medicines is ayahuasca is the divine feminine, Huachuma is the divine masculine. The way we work with them is entirely different. Ayahuasca is typically at night as a meditation in silence. Huachuma likes the sun. He's a cactus. He likes to connect with the light. So it's more typically that you work with him during the day and engage with your senses and talk to people. Although, depending how strong the medicine is, sometimes language is like not really readily available. But still, he wants to be out connecting with the world. Aya takes us in, Huachuma takes us out. And classification from a psychedelic perspective is ayahuasca is a classic psychedelic in that it has DMT, accesses the receptor sites that create that out of body experience, where Huachuma is classified as a empathogen, which is what MDMA is as well, and other medicines like that. And what that simply means is that it's not so psychedelic as it is a feeling medicine. It connects to our hearts. And while, I mean, that sounds good on paper too. Oh, yes, I want to connect to my heart. And a lot of us have broken heart syndrome and get to process grief or fear, anger, any of those emotions. But the thing that is most striking to me about Huachuma is he makes it feel safe to feel emotions in our body. It always has been, right? But most of us are programmed that it is not safe to feel something like rage or insanely deep grief or heartbreak. And there's something about the vibration of that medicine, which is truly my favorite to experience. My ego loves it. Every part of me loves it. I've never had the fear. Ayahuasca scares the crap out of me. Like, still 20 years later, I'm like, that girl is crazy. She's intense. Whereas Huachuma, I always feel safe in his embrace. That divine, masculine, loving, like nurturing energy is just, it's my happy place. So the two together, it's how I like to do retreats, is to start with Aya and go within and into the cosmos, and to end with Huachuma on the final day or close to it, because he also is really embodying, again, that safety factor of being in our bodies and allowing all of it to be sacred and safe. So those are my parents. That's how I look at it. My divine feminine and masculine examples, and the places where I can go to find the healing that I need.
Mm. That's so wonderful. And it sounds like you and I have had very, very similar experiences then. And so how you hold your retreats is exactly the same way how the retreat that I went to in Peru is. The first ceremony was Aya, and then we had a day after that of integration, sharing circle, and then the following day was with Huachuma. And we sat in a circle for about an hour, and I admittedly, I purged so much more on Huachuma than I did with Aya. And it really made me realize, not during the retreat, but a couple of years afterwards, when I sat with Huachuma again when I was in Arizona and was able to actually harvest it myself on a land that I was able to be on, and actually put my own energy into the whole process of, taking all the spines out and curating the plant itself and then boiling it down and creating it's beautiful, but not so beautiful at the same time, liquid that you end up ingesting. But it showed me that the reason that that happened was I had so many barriers around my heart. I had so much wounding and scar tissue, and after so many heartbreaks, you start building up all of these walls and creating all of this armor and force fields and everything else to try and protect your heart. And I realized that in doing that, I was protecting my heart, but I was also limiting my experience to love. I was limiting how deep I could allow myself to be present in my marriage and be present in the love for myself and love for others. And it's still a work in progress and chipping away all of that stuff. And my regular breathwork practice has also helped to kind of clear some of that stuff as well. But I think that's one of the beautiful things about doing these journeys is that it's not that they are going to heal you. They just teach you the lessons that you already learned, but show it to you in a slightly different perspective that maybe helps you understand it better.
Super important point that you brought in is, I say a lot that these medicines aren't healers. And I say that with zero disrespect because they teach us that we have the capacity to heal ourselves. And that's so much better, isn't it? Because that's why they're good parents or grandparent role models, is they teach us to do these things ourselves rather than make us dependent on them to do it for us, which is love to me. It's like, you got this, Kat. Here's the tools. I'll hold your hand through it, but I'm not doing it for you. And while that is harder, it's very challenging to find that in ourselves. I had a spiritual teacher that would say this is the only game in town. In consciousness, we came to remember that we have this capacity, and the plants are one of the tools that point us in that direction experientially, not reading in a book, but feeling it and doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that experience, I think, I had a podcast in the first season called The Key to Wisdom, and it really talks about it, how we can gain all of the intelligence, all of the knowledge, all of the book smarts that we want. But until we actually apply it into our life, until we actually experience that knowledge, that is the point when it turns to wisdom, is because we then have a learned, felt sense of what that information was trying to share to us, instead of, just continuing to read book after book after book after book, or go to ceremony after ceremony after ceremony. But if you never actually integrate any of that stuff, if you never actually apply it to your life, what was the point?
Oh, and there's so much of that in the communities, isn't there, Adam? Like, that's the heart of integration, which is why, really, if it comes down to it, I'd say that's where my heart is most, is because it's not respected in the same way, the integration part. So ayahuasca has an expression to me that's hilarious. She calls the people that use the ceremonies for the integration, which is an integration, she calls that doing the homework on the teacher's desk. She's like, I don't like that. Do your homework and then come back and sit. Like, because otherwise we're coming in with the same stuff, the same, dysfunctional relationship patterns or lack of love for ourselves, etc. And it sets it up so that Aya, or whatever medicine we're working with, has to amplify the experience of the message, the request for the homework, essentially. And that's a hard way to learn. And it's also not her favorite. Like, she's like, I like it when you come in a new state of consciousness where you've done the homework and you've got new energy to work with. And so it's really important to emphasize that integration is where everything is make or break. Like, that's where we impact our lives. The ceremonies plant the seeds or open the gates of memory. But unless we do the work to integrate it, which is work, it's fun work because it makes our lives better, but it is work. And if we don't do that, then it just becomes this memory of like, wow, I had that great ceremony that one time in Peru, but my life is the same. It's not the fault of the medicines.
Right. And it'll be 5 years this September since I last sat with Aya. because it has taken me this long to go through that integration process, to continue to apply. I mean, in my drawer right next to me here, I still have my notebook that I reference from when I was down there, and I wrote down all of the aha moments and things like that. And I still will reread those and have new realizations based off of the same thing that I've read I can't tell you how many times, because life continues to change, life continues to shift. And I'm now starting to feel like Peru is calling me again, and it's about time to go back and dive back into these practices to see, okay, now that I've done a lot of the internal work, I've done a lot of that integration, now what new doorways are. And my first two ceremonies were actually very gentle. She really eased me in, if you will. But I knew the second ceremony, when there was no real visual colors, there was no major sensations. It was about 2.5 hours in before I even purged. And she basically just told me that I was there to hold space for everybody else, that this ceremony was not about me. I got what I needed to get in the first ceremony, and now I need to actually sit with all of that information. Everybody was going up for their second cup because this was the first ceremony that they offered a second serving partway through. And I was the very last person. And I made the decision that in order to hold space for everybody else, I had to drink that second cup, because I had to put myself in the same place where everybody else was. And there was actually a lot of fear behind, because I was feeling very nauseous and just not feeling very well. And then when I took that second cup, it was like all of a sudden she took all of that away. And it was like, okay, this was a test almost to see if you were willing to actually continue feeling uncomfortable in order to continue to sit and hold space for everybody else. And now that I've been a space holder in breathwork and Reiki shares and things like that over the years, I recognize that that whole ceremony was setting me up to be a space holder, to see if I had what it took to put myself in the uncomfortable shoes of the person that I was actually sitting with.
To be able to look back and to see that golden thread, it's so special, isn't it? And she rewards courage. You know, when we're like, that's what I tell people when it's time for the second cup. The harder it is to come up to the altar, the more rewarding it will likely be. Not easy necessarily. Sometimes she rewards it with gentleness of, okay, yeah, you trusted me, you trusted yourself. And sometimes it's like, honey, it's time for some shadow work. Hold on to your hats. But regardless, like there's it's sacred to own our courage and to say, I'm going to go deeper into the unknown or to be uncomfortable. And the other piece that I love that you brought in is the awareness that these experiences are bigger than just our own journeys, and that we're all playing a role as being interconnected, helping each other. One of the things I encourage people to do, especially that have sat, somewhat regularly, is have intentions that go beyond what we want as individuals. You know, expand out, ask the planet what she wants and needs. What does the collective want and need? Or maybe let's channel the energy of the goddess. What does she want and need? Like, to get out of our myopic me. It's not just like sitting on Santa Claus's lap and asking for what you want for Christmas. Like, let's remember we're all in this together, and it's super rewarding to go in with core intentions that are not about us, because we'll get something anyway, won't we? We always do. But to have that be more about the greater whole, there's not enough of that happening. The awareness that, that's part of our relationship with each other, is to be space holders, to help, be of service. It's not me all the time.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, of the idea behind asking of how can I be of service, instead of what can I do to bring more to me? What can I do to bring more to the world? And that has been my whole goal with becoming a breathwork practitioner, with becoming a coach, is how can I now just be of service to other people? Because I've been of service to myself the entirety of my 20s and well into my 30s. And now as I'm quickly nearing 40, it's like, okay, now is really the time to just truly start giving back. And the more we give back, the more we actually will receive. It's this weird dichotomy that I think the world hasn't quite figured out yet, is the more we just take for ourselves, the more gets taken from us. But the more we freely give to the world, the more the world can freely give to us.
I have an illustration of that is mind-blowing, how ayahuasca showed me this. I was sitting with her once on a tile floor. I was sitting on a tile floor in ceremony with my teacher. I don't remember what I was clinging to, Adam, but some attachment of, I want this job, I want this relationship, whatever it is. I was clinging to something. And I remember her saying, honey, do you want the tile or do you want the whole floor? If you want the whole floor, you got to give up your tile. Give it up. Like, make it about the greater whole. And then she made some comment of like, and your tile kind of sucks, by the way. It's got cockroaches on it. It's all chipped. It's like, it's not such a great tile. Why are you clinging to it? It's your fear. And in that lesson, I started realizing exactly what you're describing. Like, I think maybe intellectually I got it, but I wasn't in the experience of it. It's like, yeah, the more that I give and the more that I am not attached, telling the universe, I have to have this, whatever it is, the universe is going to have no choice but to take that from me because I'm conditional. And so the more I have, the more I want to give away and share, because then the more I have. Like, that is the secret. And it isn't prevalent. That's the real secret to me of manifestation, not what they said around the power of the mind, et cetera, et cetera. It's being of service and giving back and reciprocity. In the tradition I studied, it's called Ayni. Ayni is the word that means sacred reciprocity. Everything should be about sacred reciprocity. And you do get spoiled in that, but it's not about that predominantly. It's about being connected to the earth, our home, and each other, and giving back as often as possible. That's the secret.
That really reminds me of the first ceremony we did on night one of the retreat was with coca leaves. And the beautiful part about that ceremony is that you never take the coca leaves yourself. You always give them to the person next to you, and then the person next to you gives them to you. And that's that sacred reciprocity of like, I give to you directly from my heart with the intent of love, compassion, gratitude, coming to you in receiving what it is that I am giving to you. And then that immediately comes back to you as they give you the leaves as well.
Just hearing the word coca, I tear up because, first of all, that the spirit of that plant is so generous, so based in generosity and integrity. The other thing about working with coca is the indigenous people have taught me that she connects the heart and the throat chakra, so that when you have her in your mouth, you cannot tell a lie. Now, isn't it interesting, Adam, that the plant that represents generosity and integrity is not only illegal in a entheogenic form, but in her raw form? It's one of the 3 plants we can't even have growing in our yard that's considered illegal. And she is the spirit of generosity and integrity. Like, it's kind of a reflection of what we're not embracing in our world. We vilify her. Not because of that consciously, because one of her alkaloids happens to be cocaine, but like, that's one of hundreds, and you have to chemically extract it and manipulate it, which is like her being raped in order to create cocaine. Like, she's the opposite when you work with her, right? Uplifting and generous and kind and sweet, not aggro and all the things that we associate with that. And yet she's highly vilified and illegal. The irony and the poetry of that at the same time. Yeah.
Heaven forbid you have a population that is always having a relationship with the plant that makes you not tell lies.
I know, right? It sounds terrible. Let's make sure that's illegal. Exactly.
Kind of while we're on the conversation of illegal, and I kind of have my own theory in why many of these entheogens have been made illegal. What has been your experience in, and I mean, you have tremendous amount more time in ceremony than I do. What is your feeling truly behind the reasoning of why these aren't just made legal for the betterment of the collective consciousness?
Great question. It's multi-layered. I mean, many people first approach it from the layer of you can't patent nature, so there's not the same level of profit. I don't think that's the core reason. That's true. And so you're seeing in the decriminalization movement a lot of synthesizing these medicines. Like a company in Vancouver just announced they're making an ayahuasca pill, and it has nothing to do with ayahuasca. It's a synthetic MAOI and a synthetic DMT, and they're calling it that because name recognition, but it's not organic, right? So there is that aspect. But I think at the end of the day, there's two core reasons for me. Number one, you addressed in terms of the discomfort. These medicines are not supposed to be comfortable. We don't like that. We're like, the ayahuasca pill circumvents purging. You don't have to do any of the uncomfortable things. And so is it really healing? I don't know. I haven't taken it. So the verdict's out, but I doubt it. Because in order to get to a place of expansion, we got to do things like what you did with cactus and purging and releasing the walls to your heart, the toxicity of trauma, all of these things. It's not easy to do that. And then beyond that, like the core reason I think the powers that be don't want nature to be legal is we wake up to the control and the programming and everything that we're under. We become autonomous and sovereign. It's hard to govern a group of sovereign beings. It's much easier to govern people in fear and control and sick too. Then they're more better behaved then. And so because these medicines do the opposite of that, they've been vilified for a very long time, and thankfully, there's a lot of us waking up to that.
Yeah. And I think it's inevitable. I mean, as the planet continues to raise its vibration, which can be seen on seismographs, can be seen on a lot of the measurements that geologists are doing constantly on the planet, they can see the vibration is increasing. And as that vibration increases and we increase our vibration on a collective scale, it's a precipice. Eventually that ball is going to roll down and there's no stopping it, whether these substances are maintained as an illegal form or whether they're, decriminalized, legalized, whatever they finally end up deciding to do with them. I think the reality is that this shift is going to happen whether the uppers that be like it or not.
The train has left the station, so to speak. And we were talking before about how all roads up the mountain lead to the same place. Like we can go kicking and screaming. We can try to run back down the mountain. We can do all these things. And it isn't gonna work. Thank goodness. Consciousness loves itself and us too much to allow for a possibility that we can just completely destruct. It won't happen. So, I mean, and I love the Malcolm Gladwell book, Tipping Point, because it talks about how the tipping point of any movement has nothing to do with majority and everything to do with the energy of momentum. We have the energy of momentum. I have goosebumps just feeling that. It's like, it's just a matter of time. Like you said, it's inevitable. The shift is going to happen no matter how powerful the people in power think that they are. They're not more powerful than consciousness itself, and certainly love and light. So thank goodness that is the truth of how this whole thing is built, with love. Yeah.
So I'm going to keep tapping into your knowledge on plant medicines here. I recently sat through a webinar that you did on Hape. And I have heard the call from Hape for a very long time, but have never had anyone really explain it in the same way that the three of you during that webinar explained it and really went in depth to it. But one of the key components, and I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a tangent here, that you guys were talking about it, was how many of these plant medicines, and you touched on it with the ayahuasca pill, are being synthesized or mechanically made. And how when that happens, it's almost like you're actually completely ruining the spirit of the plant. And I watched it happen in the legalization of cannabis in Washington, the state that I'm originally from, when they went from a medical industry that was all about the patients and helping people to go through cancer, to go through chronic illnesses and pain, to then now it's an industry just of profit. And let's make concentrates and let's make pens and let's break it all down. So now you're no longer ingesting the plant in its entirety and getting the spirit along with it, but now you're just synthesizing it down to its THC or its CBD or any of the other terpenes that go into it. And I think from what you guys were explaining, Hape is kind of going through the same thing right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, tobacco as a substance has been blazing that trail for a long, long time, just like cannabis. Let's make it personal for a second. What if somebody came to us and synthesized us down to carbon? Is our essence in the carbon that could be extracted from each of us? No. No, my spirit isn't contained in one of the alkaloids that I have. And that process of extracting something out of anything for the sake of taking it and like, oh, this is the thing that I want. It's like, that's like using a woman for her body. Like, that's not sacred and loving. So that's why plant medicine people, when I created it with my partners, were like, it's about the relationship to plants first and foremost, because we want to always remind people we are in relationship with nature, not taking from her, not manipulating and changing for our benefit. It's not for our benefit. That's the irony when we do it. It's about being in relationship with what is. Because, cannabis, most of the plants that you can buy at dispensaries have never even seen the light of day. They've been grown in a room with a lamp and pesticides and all this crap to speed it up. It's like McDonald's, how they treat the food, and that's not food. So how is it that we think this is really medicine at the end of the day when it's so disrespected and manipulated? And yeah, so we've got a lot to learn around that right now as a culture, that isn't medicine. Nature is medicine. It's right outside our window. Why do we have to keep changing these things when she has a wisdom way beyond our wisdom?
Yeah. Yeah. And so continuing with that, Hape, I loved just hearing all of your stories of building the relationship with that, and for maybe just dive into those that are like, okay, what is Hape?
Yeah. Okay. So hape, first of all, is shamanic snuff. It is it's always has the base of tobacco that is made into a very fine powder. They mix a lot of different master plants with it too, just depending on the vibration. There are hapes that are really heart opening. There are hapes that are good for the crown chakra, et cetera, et cetera. But almost all of them have the foundation of sacred tobacco, mapacho, which is, by the way, not the same species of tobacco that we have in the States. What we have in the States is a Nicotina americana. In the jungle, it's Nicotina rustica. And although there's similarities, there's a great difference in the alkaloidal structure, but most importantly, how they're grown. Mapacho is wild. Here, I was mentioning tobacco has been on a long journey of similar to cannabis. I mean, we have completely ruined the sacredness of growing tobacco, not to mention all the additives in cigarettes and all the crap that we have done to just monetize and manipulate that spirit. So tobacco in particular, he's fascinating because depending on our relationship to him, he can be deadly or he can be a healer. And I walked the whole journey of that because I was born with an underdeveloped respiratory system because my mom smoked heavily when she was pregnant with me. So I came into the world very sick, lived in an oxygen tent for a long time. And as I became, old enough to understand what was going on with me, I vilified tobacco. Like, oh, it's tobacco's fault. Tobacco did this to me. Come full circle, training to be a shamanic facilitator. And tobacco is a sacred plant in just about every shamanic tradition around the world, wherever he grows anyway. If he grows indigenous in an area, they have used him in a sacred way because he's got that vibration. but I was like, I don't want to work with this plant. This plant tried to kill me. And not true. As soon as I formed a relationship slowly, in a way that felt safe and trusting to me, I realized that it wasn't tobacco's fault. It was the relationship my mother had with tobacco. And quite likely, Adam, in a past life, I abused tobacco. It was my karma. Like, he's like, I'm just holding you accountable for what I did to him, right? Which felt so true in my body, of like, that makes sense. What an honor to get to unravel that abuse. Because when you work with him in a sacred, loving way, this plant is so healing. And I mean, people heal lung problems with tobacco. I did. I don't have asthma anymore. That's because I have a sacred relationship with sacred tobacco. So, what a teacher that, based on how we're treating him, he reflects that could be deadly or a healer. It's mind blowing. What an amazing spirit he is, to love us in a way that he'll play the role of a villain too, if we need it.
Well, and I think that almost kind of touches on the point of, it's like that old saying of too much of a good thing is a bad thing. If you don't have a sacred relationship with any of these plant teachers, and even something as simple as lavender could be considered a plant teacher, oak, spruce, elm, any of the trees, dandelion, like, there's so many different plants that can be teachers that are totally non-psychoactive. But again, too much of anything can be a bad thing. My wife recently read a book that was following a old story of a woman from France that had an apothecary. And she was explaining to her apprentice that anything that is a plant medicine can be healing at a lower dosage, but can be toxic at a higher dosage. And I found that so fascinating. I mean, I was literally just walking through the room as she was listening to the audiobook, and I was like, yeah, that is totally true. Of, if you overdo it with anything, that's abusing the relationship. And now it's no longer a sacred union, but now starts to become an abusive relationship. Just as I think many relationships with humans can start out beautifully, blissful, wonderful, but can turn toxic if those sacred boundaries are no longer honored.
And the tricky and yet divine part of what you're describing, it's so true, is that overdoing it, the definition of that is different for each plant and each person. I can't put a formula of, well, this is too much lavender and this is, too little lavender. It's a personal relationship, just like we can't do that in terms of relationship with each other. So we have to be conscious. We have to be aware of the communication between ourselves and the plant. And that's why, even in the world of taking natural supplements, it's still a disconnect because we're just popping things unconsciously. I've got a lot to say about that in the microdosing world. It's like everybody wants to microdose now. I'm like, well, if you're doing it unconsciously and you're not creating a relationship, you might be causing more harm than good without even knowing it. Yeah, because the plants hold us accountable to the fact that it's a relationship. And only we know, in a relationship with our body and these plants, when we've overdone it, when it's become codependent, or when we've used the energy of that for escape, or whatever it is. It's not a formula, but that's why we got to bring our awareness and our reverence in order to find and where that balance is, that dance is. Tobacco in particular is a great teacher of that, because he can make it really obvious. A plant like lavender might be more subtle. We really have to pay attention. Although I call lavender the silent assassin, because she's so strong, and doesn't necessarily get that reputation. But regardless, that's why it's a relationship. We got to listen of what's being communicated. What are we asking for? And what are the results that we're having? And what does our intuition say is the right course of action? It isn't more all the time. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and you touched on that in that webinar when you were talking about Hape and dosages, at how for one person they can take a large amount and have the exact same effect or even a lesser effect than somebody who takes a quarter the size of their dose. Because we're all unique. We all have different body chemistry. We all have different metabolisms. We all have different abilities to process things based upon the health of our microbiome and our digestive system and things like that. So it's unfortunately kind of a trial and error process to figure out, like, you almost have to overdo it to be able to learn where your threshold is, and then say, okay, I know that if I take this much, it's not going to be a great experience and I'm not actually going to have the relationship that I need. But if I take this much, and I had a 16-year abusive relationship with cannabis. And it wasn't until I actually went to Peru that I had a strong enough why to quit. And I quit 30 days before I went because I wanted it completely out of my system so that I could meet these medicines just as me and not have any traces of anything within my system. And it drastically changed my relationship after that ceremony because I recognized at how much of an abusive relationship and a dependent relationship it became. Because when I had a bad day, I'd smoke a bowl and I would feel better in the moment, not realizing that I was just putting those emotions on the back shelf to be felt later, but be felt more intensively later because they had compiled one on top of the other over and over and over again, instead of learning practices outside of medicines to be able to process through those emotions, process through those feelings. And now that's why I have a regular meditation practice, a regular breathwork practice, a regular movement practice that helps me to work through those things. And then when I'm ready to actually dive in deeper, that's when I can start having ceremony with cannabis or mushrooms or ayahuasca or any of these other substances that are tools for us to be able to use.
Cannabis is another teacher in that regard, like tobacco, right? You can go to her over and over again with the desire to hide and suppress. And she's like, okay, all right, we're doing this again. Okay. And she's so patient and she's so unconditional in how she loves us. It's like, yeah, you're gonna learn the long way that this is not healthy. It's not kind to her, but she's so patient. And then we get it finally of like, oh, wait a second, the relationship is out of alignment. And then you can go to her with the intention of help me process these emotions, help me work with my fear, help me do these things. And she's like, game on, honey. It's about time we can do that. Like, she has that capacity, but you need to ask her. Like, I always use the 80-20 rule with cannabis versus ayahuasca, where with cannabis, it's 80% you and your intentions and 20% her. With ayahuasca, it's 20% you and your intentions and 80% her. You know, you just need a little door opening, but cannabis is the opposite. And because of that, she's such an incredible teacher. So amazing that you got the message, you know, of like, wait a second, time out. Like, I have the wrong intentions with this plant. It's not actually healing at this point, because that people get sucked into that for a lifetime, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And many things, I think many people don't understand the thing with cannabis, as is true with a lot of entheogens, it's an amplifier. It is going to amplify whatever you are feeling in your subconscious if you don't set that intention. If you don't come to it with that reverence and say, this is what I want to work on, it's going to naturally amplify. So, for example, if you're feeling anxious, and for any of those of you that are like, I tried cannabis once, I never want to try it again because I felt super anxious and super paranoid. The reality is if you didn't come to it with an intention and you were already having anxiety and you already had paranoia within your subconscious, guess what? She just amplified it and made it be known that that is there. And I think that's, again, a message that people don't take into account, is that anything that comes up is coming up to move through you. It's coming up to be shown to you of, this is where your work lies. That's why the paranoia can come up. That's why the anxiety can come up. That's why it can just take you from feeling pretty happy and blissful beforehand to feeling not so great, because maybe you weren't actually being honest with yourself that you weren't feeling that great to begin with.
Exactly. And, you know, you and I have opposite relationships with cannabis, in that when I worked with her in my teen and younger years, I always had that fear amplified. And so I was like, God, this medicine sucks. I'm just like, everyone's laughing and having fun. And I'm like, is there someone at the door? Just like freaking out. And I didn't understand until much later. Basically, when I worked with cannabis intentionally for the first time, she was like, "You're welcome. I've always held you in integrity with what you were working with." And I'm like, "Thank you." Like, because deep down, I wanted that. I've always wanted to know the truth about what the heck is brewing in me, and where am I creating my own suffering. And cannabis knows what our unconscious intentions are. She knows that. So ganja gave me exactly what I wanted. I just didn't know it until much, much later. And so I'm so grateful to her that I never really had the fun times with her, because down deep I was asking for the lessons, amplifying the thing that I wanted to learn to heal. And
Mm,
she did, but she gets vilified for that a lot.
yeah,
And not her fault.
absolutely. And it really is kind of that whole point of, again, treating these as medicine, not as something that is just a recreational drug or something that I'm going to do and sit down and play video games and just zone out. That's not holding a sacred relationship. That's not holding the reverence for the whole reason that those plants are here. And I love how Terence McKenna had this beautiful way of looking at these plants of why is it that psilocybin mushrooms grows on every single continent with the exception of Antarctica. And the only reason it doesn't grow on Antarctica is because it's covered in ice. I'm sure if that ice melted away, they'd probably start growing there too, because they are there teaching us this is something to help you heal. The same way why if you look out in your front yard, there's probably dandelions growing, because again, they are also there to help us heal. Many people just look at it as this weed that needs to be eradicated and taken out, but yet there's so many beautiful benefits of it if you're willing to look into it.
The invasive species are the most interesting to me on this planet because of that reason right there. We knock them down and they pop right back up. I'm like, guys, you need me. I'm not going anywhere. And I trained for a while in my 30s with a master herbalist who's an expert in Lyme disease. And she showed me the trajectory of Lyme disease all throughout first in the States and the planet. And there's a plant called Japanese knotweed that helps suppress the symptoms of Lyme disease. The trajectory of where it's popped up is exactly the same. You superimpose those maps, it's exactly the same. And that was the moment when she showed me that where I realized nature knows what she's doing. Like, who are we to think that dandelions need to be weeded because they're a nuisance? No, there's a reason that medicine is all around us. Exactly. I mean, dandelions help work with anger and congestion of the liver. We got a lot of that. We
Yeah.
need him. We need that help. And if we could just remember the intelligence of nature and that she really is trying to react to what we're going through to help, then a lot of the suffering that we go through could be immediately eliminated. We just look out our window and realize the medicine I need is right out there.
Mm. And it's interesting at how all of the indigenous cultures had the intelligence to go to the plants
Always.
and learn the information firsthand.
Yeah. Yeah. People are always like, how did we figure out that ayahuasca plus chacruna equals the brew? I'm like, because they were listening to the communication from the plant. The, indigenous peoples have never been disconnected from nature. They've always been in dialogue. It's us in the Western world that have completely disconnected. And it shows. No offense to all of us, but it does.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So as we're kind of nearing the end of this episode, Kat, what's one piece of advice that you could give to the listeners if they really wanted to start creating a sacred relationship with plants, whether that be ayahuasca or cannabis or lavender or dandelion?
Oh, great question. Well, first of all, it's always the question of which plant should I work with? And it's the plant maybe that's in your yard. It's the plant that you can't get out of your field. Like, for example, I never liked rose, but rose was just freaking everywhere for me. And I was finally like, oh, okay, I think rose is trying to get my attention. Guess what one of my most profound teachers in the world is? Rose.
Mm,
Like, incredible ally that she is. But I had to finally realize she was trying to get my attention and to take the time to connect with her. So I call it dating a plant. Like, we can date Rose as an example. And the way that I did that is spending time with her every day as a tea or having her in fresh form. We want to engage our senses, basically, same way we do with each other. When we go on dates, we try to smell nice, we look all cute, we present this like energy of connect with me. Do the same for your plant. Like, create a sacred space for the plant you want to connect with. Wear the essential oil of the plant if it exists. Like, use and engage the senses, and then begin a dialogue. And really, we dialogue with plants through our hearts, not our heads. So there's something called the heart field that extends out from our bodies. Like, it's intelligence, it's energy. Ask permission first with the plant, of just like we would with each other. I don't like it when people go right in for a hug. It's like, make sure it's consensual. We want it all to be consensual. Do the same with the plant. I've never asked a plant, hey, can I engage with you, and heard a no. Maybe once. I think there was one plant that was like, yeah, I'm not feeling it. I'm like, cool. But asking for permission and feeling, trusting the response. And then we can, engage with our heart field, connect through the feeling space. And they talk to us through song lyrics, through memories, through sensations in our bodies. Like, it's very rarely the way you and I are talking, although if you're clairaudient and you connect in that way, it can happen. But it's just like showing up and connecting and asking questions and journaling and logging the whatever happens. For example, I did this exercise once with a couple of the apprentices I was working with at the time, and we sat in front of a plant and did this whole exercise. And all of us came back and said, we just kept thinking about our mothers. And it turns out we were sitting with motherwort, which is a maternal energy. So there's no accidents of the communications that coming in, especially if we think it's irrelevant. It's like, why am I thinking of my mom? Because that's the vibration of the plant. So to trust that and to start playing detective. But it just takes showing up consciously with an effort and sacredness and dating or connecting and communicating with the plant. And I promise magic will happen. It always does.
Well, I'm going to take that as another point of why Hape has continued to pop up in conversations with people who have, partaken in plant medicines. Like, it comes up. And so I'm taking that as, okay, maybe now is the time.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Let me know how it goes.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, is there any programs that you have going on or anything that you'd like to share with the listeners if they really resonated with what you had to say and they want to work a little bit more with you?
Absolutely. I do a lot of things, coaching and retreats, but the thing that is probably most relevant to what we talked about today is at my website, plantmedicinepeople.com, I offer something called the Plant Medicine Mystery School. And it is a 9-week online course where I teach how to communicate with plant consciousness, deepen the relationships with plants, teach about, some of the shamanic traditions and secrets of plant communication that I got to learn in this process. So if people are passionate about deepening their relationship, but, it's not time to jump on a plane to the jungle, I share that as best I can through Zoom, through modern technology. So, and that's all of that is available. Lots of information at plantmedicinepeople.com. Thank you for asking.
Absolutely. And I'll have all of the details, Kat's website and Instagram profile in the show notes below, so you guys can follow that to get in touch with her. Definitely suggest following her page. Tons of great information and also just wonderful little posts that really make you question.
Thank you.
So thanks for being here, Kat. Really, really enjoyed your time and your wisdom.
Adam, it's such an honor. Thank you for all that you do for these plants as well.
Very much appreciate that. So thank you all for being here. Thanks for listening to another episode, and I'll catch you on the next one.